I'm going to ask the director to share with the committee the situation that occurred with Tanaje Barnes. If you would proceed to discuss this case and tell us what you can, we'd be very grateful.
I would like to start with an opening statement. Thank you to the Chairwoman Feigenholz, Vice Chairwoman Ramirez, Spokesperson Sumner, and all of the members of the Adoption and Child Welfare Committee for holding this important hearing. I welcome the opportunity to engage with you in this conversation and work together to improve the ways DCFS serves our children and families. Protecting vulnerable children and helping families safely care for them is the work of my life. I have served DCFS in various roles for 28 years, and as of February 15th, I'm serving as the agency's interim director. I take the responsibility and the trust that has been placed in me extraordinarily seriously. There is no more important work we can do as public servants than protecting the most vulnerable in our state, especially our children. The loss of any child is a tragedy, but in my years of doing this work, I can tell you that losing a child who has had an interaction with our agency is profoundly devastating. It is something that never leaves you, and it shouldn't. In these cases, we have a responsibility to understand the full scope of what happened, identify where we can come up short, and devote ourselves to ensuring it doesn't happen again. The DCFS Inspector General report details a number of findings, many of which are extremely troubling. I want to assure you that this report and its recommendations are being considered with the gravity they deserve by our agency. In the short term, we have taken a number of steps to improve our policies, practices, and procedures, from reducing caseloads, moving higher risk cases back to DCFS from private agencies, and upgrading our technology. I believe these steps will make some much needed improvements in how DCFS operates. But over the long term, it's clear that we have a lot more work to do. I'm grateful that DCFS has a partner in that work, and all of you, and Governor Pritzker. The governor has made it clear from the outset of his administration that DCFS and the children and families we serve will be a priority. His budget proposal provides funding for 126 additional staff members. These are the caseworkers and investigators on the front line, working directly with children and families. This funding will have an extraordinary impact on caseload and the time and quality of service we can provide to all in our care. The governor's budget also provides funding to upgrade our technology system, part of which are 30 years old and badly in need of an overhaul. More than this initial budget, I am pleased to see the governor shows a firm commitment to funding the human services infrastructure that was badly damaged in the previous years. DCFS is one component of a community of agencies, organizations, and professions that serve our children and families. Fully funding human services agencies and ensuring staff are compensated for the work they provide will go a long way of getting our state to the place where it needs to be. We know there's much more work to do before we are fully living up to our obligation to children and families. All of us at DCFS are committed to doing the work, and we are grateful for your partnership. We welcome your questions, feedback, concerns, and recommendations. I will now give you the timeline of the involvement with Tanaje Barnes. 12/23/2017. DCFS received a hotline call alleging abuse and neglect regarding Tanaje. At this time, Tanaje was living with her mother's boyfriend, and Tanaje's brother. 12/27/17. A case was opened. Tanaje and her brother were placed in foster care with the case management by Webster Cantrell Hall, a private agency. 12/28/17, the court granted DCFS temporary custody of Tanaje and her brother. Services to the mother and boyfriend began immediately and included mental health assessments, parenting classes, and substance abuse screening. The family was compliant with services. Visitation with Tanaje was established for her mother and her father. 3/27/18. By order of the court, the children were returned home to their parents after successful completion of their parenting classes. Based on case-specific interaction, custody of Tanaje was granted to her father, her brother was returned to her mother and her boyfriend. Beginning in March 2018, under court supervision, aftercare services were provided to both households by Webster Cantrell Hall. Some of the services included linkage to community resources, including programs administered by the Illinois Department of Human Services and the local health department. Visitation between the two involved families was established. During this time, the workers made routine visits with the family. 6/27/18, Tanaje was removed from her father's home following a hotline call alleging abuse and again placed in foster care. August 8/18, by order of the court, Tanaje returned home to her mother and her boyfriend. Webster Cantrell Hall continued to monitor the home through weekly unannounced visits. September 12, 2018, DCFS received a report alleging Tanaje had red scratches on her stomach and a diaper rash. An investigation concluded the report was unfounded as the marks were verified as scarring from a previous incident and no additional services were recommended. 10/24/18, upon recommendation of Webster Cantrell Hall, based on families' cooperation with services and satisfactory monitoring of the home, the court ordered the case closed. With case closure, the child welfare involvement with the family ended. November 6, 2018, a call was made to the DCFS hotline that was taken as an information-only report regarding non-compliance with voluntary community service and medical neglect for lack of immunizations. The call did not proceed to an investigation as the information provided did not substantiate allegations of medical neglect. February 11, 2019. Tanaje's death was reported to DCFS. DCFS opened an investigation in cooperation with the local police department. Tanaje's brother was placed in foster care, and the case is being managed by DCFS.
Thank you, Director. We're going to go to Inspector General Paniak, who, for purposes of this committee, I think that we sent each of you a link to her 216-page report where she outlines incidences similar to this that occurred in the state of Illinois in calendar year 2018, so that the committee has an understanding of the depth and breadth of the investigations that the OIG does and the recommendations that they make. I just want everyone to know that we in this committee right now are in a place where there is an ongoing investigation and there are confidentiality limitations here because it is a criminal case. So if you get inadequate answers, it's likely for that reason. But I'm rest assured that as this resolves itself and we get more answers, we will hopefully be privy to recommendations. Thank you for coming here, and you may proceed, Inspector Paniak.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for this opportunity to talk to you today. I think I'd like to just start by saying that no single agency working alone can be expected to possess the expertise required to effectively eliminate all child abuse and neglect fatalities. Responsibility for protecting children must be shared among many sectors of the community, all working together to strengthen prevention, early intervention, the child welfare agencies' intervention, and cross-system collaboration. And so I ask that we keep that in mind as we talk through some of this today. As Representative Feigenholz said, my name is Meryl Paniak. I'm currently the Acting Inspector General for DCFS, and I've been in this role for a year. Prior to that, I have worked with DCFS almost 19 years, and I have held various roles from Chief Administrative Law Judge to Associate Deputy of Child Protection. I've been the Ethics Officer, and prior to this role, I was our Chief Legislative Counsel. So my background is similar to Director Dyer Webster next to me, and we've worked together for many years. I have with me today other staff from my office, should there be specific questions. Our Chief Counsel, Barb Schulman, is here, Supervisory Attorney Ann McIntyre, and my Deputy Inspector General, Denise Gonzalez. I think what's important to know is that this office, the Inspector General, was created in 1993 under Governor Jim Edgar as a result of the death of Joseph Wallace. And that was also a child that was returned home by the courts to a mother who struggled with mental health issues and resulted in the death, and hence this office was created. We investigate allegations of misconduct, we investigate violations of rules and procedures and laws, and we do death investigations, and complaints come to us from a variety of sources: employees, foster parents, service providers, contractors, and the general public. And we begin to do an investigation. Death investigations, when you look at our report, and I know a lot has been paid attention to this number 98, those are death investigations where there has been prior contact with DCFS within the last year, so some involvement. But we reviewed over 300 death cases in the last fiscal year, and so some of those never had involvement with DCFS, some may have had involvement beyond that 1 year. So we look at child death cases, and you'll see they are summarized in our report. When we do an investigation, we, and in this case, are going to have an investigative plan, and that plan will entail gathering all records. So we are looking at the child protection investigations regarding Tanaja. We are looking at the placement records. We will look at court transcripts. We will get police reports. We will get autopsy coroner reports. And we will do a thorough review of all those records and determine who we need to interview to gather additional information. So we try to make our work thorough, accurate, and relevant and timely so that we can make recommendations to the director. And the director is the policymaker for the department, so many times she accepts those recommendations, sometimes we amend them and talk them through, and sometimes we just simply disagree. And as you know, the department has gone through some different directors who come with different visions, and so there's always this ongoing process of implementing and working through recommendations that we've made. I think the other thing I want to mention is that when you look at the 98 deaths that we reviewed, the number is important to put into context. So many of those deaths were caused as a result of a natural cause. Many of them are from accidental reasons. However, 33 of those deaths were children between the ages of 0 and 3, and that's concerning. The core mission of DCFS is the safety, well-being, and permanency of children. Child protection investigators and staff are called upon to often make very critical decisions about a family in a crisis with a lot of complex and complicated issues, and oftentimes they have very little information at the time they have to make that decision. So it is important to always keep that in mind, and it is crucial that there is ongoing supervision and ongoing training to support the staff that are working with these families in the field. I think that what I would share is that the Family First Act that's coming from the federal government is going to be very critical in improving some of what we've seen and some of the concerns that we all have and share today. That act is going to provide additional monies for reunification services. It's going to provide additional time period for post-reunification up to 15 months. And it'll ensure that there are quality services available to all children and families, and that all children and families get treated equitably. Absolutely need better data and research to make better decisions, and the Family First Act is going to ensure we have that. And I also believe, and if I'm not mistaken, it is going to require that there be maltreatment reviews done and some data on tracking that as well. So I don't know if you have any specific questions about my report that I'm happy to answer for you today.
Thank you. I'd like to add Representatives Mussman and Willis to the roll, and I would like to also ask members of the committee if they have questions of either the OIG or the director. Representative Scheer.
Thank you. I have quite a few, so it's possible that some of you might have the same questions. If you would be so kind as to let me read all the questions into the record, and then if we don't have time to get them all answered, I would like a written response to these questions. First of all, I do want to thank you, Ms. Dyer-Webster. We've talked on the phone a lot, but it's nice to meet you guys in person. Is it like 2 weeks that you've had this position?
Yes.
Well, welcome.
Thank
That's
you very
tough
much.
to walk into this. So I just wanted to set the groundwork that you've only been doing this job and everything. So, you know, basically you came on the job after the death is the point that I wanted to make out. So I think that the most pressing question that I have, I'll start with that, and then I'm going to just read all the questions so that they're into the record, and then we can go back to answer them, okay? And as I read them, you two can decide which is more appropriate for whom to answer. So question number one, when children go back to parents, does DCFS need to provide proof of immunizations and routine well child checks? That, I think, is the most significant question that we have, because that's what prompted the hotline call on November 6th, was they had lots of concerns. My understanding in all of this, it's all just my understanding, but that's why Baby Talk called, is because they saw many, many things. I have a whole list of concerns they had, but when they called the hotline, they mentioned specifically this because they knew they were held accountable to that, so they assumed that that was also a giant red flag to DCFS rather than just a concern. Okay, so now specifically concerning Tanaja, on November 6th, when Baby Talk took the call from Ashley Miller at the DCFS hotline, I would like to know exactly again what was said on that call from Baby Talk and what happens on the computer system regarding a cross-referencing alert for it to show up, oh, this child has been in and out of DCFS and foster care many, many times in her 2 little years of life. So that would be, after the main question, that would be question 1. Question 2, and if you want to just jot the numbers down if that'd make it easier for you, how are hotline workers trained in the area of closed cases? Number 3, we recognize and agree that returning children to their homes with biological parents is the ultimate goal. In the past, have rewards such as gift cards or bonuses ever been offered as a reward to caseworkers for placing children back in these homes? Number 4, how many times did Webster Cantrell Hall visit Tanaja, and what was the documentation on those visits? Number 5, how does the budget work between DCFS and Webster Cantrell Hall as far as payments go? Number 6, when did the 6-month aftercare follow-ups begin? What date? And number 7, if they did not begin when Tanaja started living with her mother, why did they begin at a different time, like while she was in foster care? Is that typical or... Number 8, read the documentation, please, for the record on the attempted home visits by Baby Talk when they were refused entry into the home by the mother and boyfriend. Number 9, is any priority given to mandatory reporters when they call the hotline rather than an anonymous call or a call from a friend or neighbor or something? Number 10, how many hotline calls are required before a home inspection actually occurs? Number 11, is there a problem finding reliable foster parents? And then number 12, what do home visits consist of? Is there a checklist? And I wanted to draw attention to this one because I would like to know if there is a law that says, and maybe we could start with this one and then go back to, that's all my questions. But is there like an actual checklist of what a caseworker home visitor does when they go into a home? And do they go any further than the living room? Because it's my understanding that often on these home visits, they don't get any further than the living room. So the family can just tidy up the living room and the rest of the house can be whatever. And I also understand that sometimes they're not allowed in the house and the home visit occurs out on the front porch. So that was one. And then if I can go back to clarify the reason of my top priority question about proof of immunization. Once these children are put back into their home, this is just my opinion, having been a teacher for 35 years, as well as having had to make these mandatory calls before, because I was a mandatory reporter as a teacher. I'm just really, really worried about once they go back into their natural home. And we all want that. Please don't get us wrong on that. I'm sure everybody in this room wants that. My worry is if the case is closed and they're back home, who's watching out for this little child who can't talk yet, who can't walk yet, who can't use the bathroom by themselves or feed themselves yet? Who's watching out for them? So my thought is if they have to be seen by the doctor, then that's another mandatory reporter of 2 eyes on that child. They can be looking for bruises. They can be checking that they had their immunizations. They can be checking their weight to make sure that they've had food, as well as the nurse at the doctor's office. So there's another set of eyes. To me, it's of utmost importance that they get their well care checks, of course, and that they get their shots. But maybe even more importantly, that then there's a mandatory reporter looking that child over from head to toe to make sure they're okay. So I think that's why that is my biggest concern. So if we could go to that question and what happens in a home visit first, and then whatever we have time for after that.
That was a lot of questions, but all very good ones. And I think it would be great if perhaps amongst the two of you, you decide who can answer them. You need the list. Does anybody?
Well,
Did
I
you
will
get
say,
it?
I was able to jot down some of it, but I do think the majority of the questions, it would be appropriate to be answered by the department and not from my side, but I can certainly help if I need to fill in.
All right, well, here is the list of questions being delivered to you, and Director or Merrill, either of you, please.
So for the overarching question of proof of immunizations from once a child returned home, while a child is in DCFS care, we ensure that they receive the necessary timely immunizations. Once a child returns home to the family, there's no law that requires that family to get immunizations for that child. The home visit, there is a home safety checklist that the assigned caseworker is required to do when they go to the home. And yes, they go to all areas of the home in completing that home safety checklist. And the home safety checklist is completed prior to a child being returned home.
Does that include things like, is there heat, water, toilets that flush,
Yes.
food?
Yes.
So I know Webster Cantrell Hall may or may not be here, but if the case was closed, then I can assume that all these things on this checklist were all A-OK when they suggested to the court that the case be closed?
Yes. Your first or second question was how our hotline workers train on the areas of closed cases. So the hotline worker is trained to take the information from the caller. Based on the information that is given to the worker at the hotline, that worker determines whether what is being told to them rise to the level of abuse or neglect as outlined in rules and procedures that are supported by the Abuse and Neglect Child Reporting Act. Once that worker makes that determination, a supervisor reviews that information and signs off on it. If a report is not taken, a supervisor can decide to make a report be taken if the level of information is there to rise to the standard of abuse or neglect.
So is there something that like pops up on your computer like a red flag that says, alert, this child has been in and out of DCFS?
No, while the call taker is on the phone with the reporter, the person is doing a search in one screen to see if this family has any history. So they ask for the name and the date of birth and addresses, and then they compare that to what we have in our system while they are actually on the phone with the reporter. If it's an open case already, say that we're already servicing the family, then that information will go to the caseworker. If we are not involved with the family, then that information can, or if we have a pending investigation on this family already, that will show to the call taker, and then that call taker will send the information to the person who is already working that case. So the history of the family involvement with DCFS is in the computer, and the worker has to go and put in the identifying information to find it.
And they always do that if it's a closed case?
It's required on every case.
Okay. So when you say they'll go back and talk to the worker, in this instance, would they talk to the Webster Cantrell or would they talk to the DCFS caseworker?
No, because the case was closed, there was nowhere to send the information. The information is sent to someone who is actively working on a case, be it an investigation or an open case.
Okay, I struggle with figuring that one out. To me, if they look at a screen and see all those alerts and the child's not going to the doctor or getting their shots or anything, I just can't believe that there's just nowhere to turn, so they just forget about it. That's just the confusing part to me.
Right, I'm sorry I'm not being
Well,
clear.
I'll remind people again, you've been on the job 2 weeks. You were not even a director at the time that this happened. So we're trying to dig through months ago and the people who were doing their work. And again, I'm seeing right here, well, there's a law that we need to do, is something about that they have to see the doctor. And if not, it's a red flag. Just like if the child's at baby talk, they have to go to the doctor and get their shots. And if they don't, it's a big red flag against baby talk. So to me, it should also be a big red flag of an alert to DCFS. That just makes sense to me, but okay, thank you. We'll keep going.
Welcome. Number 3, is it true that DCFS gave out gift cards? Gift cards were given out at one of our offices in northern region. The area administrator thought that he had a misguided idea that it would be an incentive for investigators to complete their cases timely. Once administration found out that this area administrator was doing this at the one office, that practice was discontinued and has not been done anywhere else around the state.
What about bonuses? Are there bonuses, or were there, like, did there used to be, now there aren't, or?
I am not aware of any bonuses ever being given out.
Okay.
Next question. How many times did Webster Cantrell visit to Najee, and what were the documentation on those visits? I don't have the exact numbers but I can get you the exact number of times. But when when the case first came out, they were going out weekly, and after she was returned home, to the father, they were going weekly. When she was returned to the mother, they were going weekly. And then in between those visits, there were also weekly visits because Webster Cantrell was facilitating visits when Najee was with the father. Webster Cantrell was facilitating visits with the mother. When Najee was with the mother, Webster Cantrell was picking Najee up from the mother's and taking her to the father's home, and those were weekly visits. How does the budget work between DCFS and Webster Cantrell? Every year, DCFS executes a contract with Webster Cantrell and other private agencies to provide foster care services payments. And those payments are made monthly based on the number of children and youth that they actually serve. The terms and condition of the foster care programs are the same across the entire state. The payments for private agencies include both the reimbursement for the foster parent payment as well as for the care of the child and the payment of the case management services. A foster care contract with the agency, we've had a contract with Webster Cantrell for a long time.
So no matter where you're at in the state, the amount you get per child and so on is the same
Yes.
at all agencies?
Well,
Or do some agencies get more or less, or?
there's different rates for the different type of children who may be in your care, but for the most part, if it's a traditional foster home or a relative foster home, the rate is the same.
Okay.
So the rate is based on the type of service that you are providing.
Thank you.
When did the 6-month follow-up care begin? 6-month follow-up care began in March of 2018. When Najee was returned to her father, Webster Cantrell started the follow-up services, and the brother, Najee's younger brother, was returned to the mother. So follow-up care, aftercare started with the mother in March of 2018 also.
Okay, so doesn't that go for 6 months?
It goes for 6 months in reviewing the case file and talking to the caseworker at Webster Cantrell, the way the follow-up aftercare was, in her mind, the follow-up aftercare started in March because they provided follow-up aftercare for Tanaje brother into Tanaje with the father. So they counted that time from March through October or September as 6 months.
So Webster Cantrell is still seeing them in September, and they're considering that aftercare?
Yes.
But the child had really only been with her mother since August, right?
Correct.
So she only had basically 1 month of aftercare from when she went to see to live with the mother? I thought on the timeline she went to be with the mother in August of 2018.
Yes.
And if you said it started in March instead of August, then counting up 6 months, that would be September.
Yes.
So from August to September.
Yes.
So is there a law about when aftercare starts?
There's no law, but we do have it provided in the contract with all the agencies that aftercare is to be provided for 6 months.
And it doesn't say when the 6 months starts?
The 6 months starts, it's implied, but not just stated. It's implied that it starts when the child is returned to the parent.
Okay, so see, I think we need to have that a law that's not implied. I think that needs to just be a law.
We can make it clear.
Right.
Yes, we're working on that.
Okay, thank you.
The narrative from the call to the hotline after the case was closed. It's the narrative as written from the 11/6/2018 call. It's a mandated reporter call only. Children have no known medical issues that would require follow-up care. Information does not substantiate allegations of medical neglect. Tanaje 2, and it has the name of her brother, but I will not say that. 1, were recently returned to the home of the mother and Anthony Sr. father/paramour after being in DCFS care. Tanaje has a speech delay, and Twanka was referred to early intervention. However, Twanka has not followed through with contacting the agency for services. Anthony Jr. has only received his 2-month and 4 months immunization, and Twanka has not registered the children with a physician.
Do you have also what Baby Talk said in their hotline call? When they called there, what did they say?
This is a summary of what was told to the worker, the hotline call taker, who typed this out and put it in the system.
Okay, I have in my records that on October 12th, 16th, 22nd, 30th, November 2nd, on all of those times, and November 15th, that all those times Baby Talk tried to get in to their home and was denied for a variety of reasons. And that is part of what prompted the report and why Baby Talk called and said, and they are not seeing the doctor getting their shots, because they probably, I'm just guessing, but they figured, well, if they had to make sure that they got shots and they weren't, then that would be what they needed to exactly say when they made the call to prompt another alert. But that does answer my question. Thank you.
Welcome. Oh, I'm sorry, there was more. I
Yes.
didn't read the entire thing. DCFS involvement for unknown reasons. Tanaje's father, name unknown, identified as additional support. No known police involvement, domestic violence, substance abuse, AKA disabilities, Native American heritage, prior death of a child, in or safety concerns for the worker. SAC was positive, pending SCR regarding non-involved parent. SICE is positive, no open case. Address negative for priors on non-participants. That's the complete narrative from the call.
Okay, that finishes for that question.
Is any priorities given to mandated reporters when they call the hotline? No. The priority is given to what is said by the person who is calling the hotline. The call taker is listening for information that a child is at risk or not safe based on being abused or neglected. That is what they are trained to listen for. So just the regular person on the street who calls in and gives information that would put a child at risk is given as much credence as anyone who calls the hotline.
Okay.
How many hotline calls are required before a home inspection occurs? I'm thinking that you're asking about an actual investigation where someone goes out and investigate the allegations. So there is no specific number. Again, it goes to the information that is provided to the call taker. If the call taker receives information that a child is at risk being abused or neglected, then an investigation is opened.
So it's really the person that takes the hotline call that makes that decision?
Yes, based on the information that they're given. And they ask questions for additional information.
Okay.
Is there a problem finding reliable foster parents? There's not a problem finding reliable foster parents. There's a problem, or there's a shortage of foster parents for specific populations, our medical neglect, our older youth. So we need more foster parents who are willing to take specific children. I think I answered the one about what does the home visit consist of, or initially, but
Yes.
they go through the house and they look to make sure that what's in the home meets the minimum parenting standards. That there's food in the cabinet, or the parent have some way of getting food to the children, that there are no environmental hazard, no cords or anything hanging out the outlets.
So is that true also for other providing agencies like Webster Cantrell Hall? And I mean, do they all follow that same checklist, or is that just DCFS?
It's for every agency. Everyone we contract with has to follow the same rules and procedure as the caseworkers at DCFS.
And what happens if they have to meet them on the front porch or aren't allowed to go any further than the living room?
So when a child is in the home, if we have returned a child, if we've had your child in custody and we return your child to you, you have to let us in your home to see that child while we're providing aftercare services, because while we're providing aftercare services, the case is still open in court. So if you don't let us in your home to see your house so we can do that home safety checklist, that is what will be reported to the court. The judge and the other attorneys in that court case, in the case, will not be able to close until that parent cooperates with services.
Okay.
I just want to, I had some follow-up questions from her questions, but Inspector, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple comments. The Office of the Inspector General actually created that home safety checklist, years ago. It came out of recommendations that were seen, and there is a home safety checklist required by child protection investigators, intact, placement, I might be missing one. So there is a checklist that was came out of this office's recommendations and was created. This office also had done an investigation around the gift cards. It's not in this report from this fiscal year. It was prior. So I believe there was an investigation on that that is in one of our prior reports if the committee is interested in that for whatever reason.
Could you provide that to us?
Yes.
That little piece out of probably another 200-page report, but
Just
that would be
part,
great.
Yes. And then I did just want to add that, DCFS is an allegation-based system. So I think what you heard the director saying is that when they're taking a call, they're looking to see if it meets certain criteria for an allegation. We are not an assessment-based system. And so it cuts both ways. We just need to keep that in mind.
So I just want to I have spent a great deal of time on the phone with Representative Scheer and with the department, and I have follow-up questions to her questions and some of the answers that we just received. I think when it comes to that home visit list, what was so alarming was a discovery, I think it was reported in the newspaper, possibly from the police, that Tinashe died in a room where it was very cold and there was no window. And so this is an image that is sort of etched in our minds about this poor little girl. And I think that whether or not people can get past the living room to see other conditions of the home and where the child may be. I know a lot of this is unpredictable. I'm sure the caseworker did not imagine that there was a punishment room. But it's noteworthy that perhaps maybe we should do a little bit more. The other thing that to follow up on Representative Scheer's question about the hotline and how this occurs, and the second report. So this child, in your timeline, Director, on 12/28/17, there is a mental health assessment and substance abuse screening. I know that some of these are under investigation and HIPAA protected, but I bring this up because I truly believe when we see how Tinashe died, it begs the question of whether or not there were any indication of substance abuse or mental health screening that may have indicated something. There were so many risk factors from my perspective. You had two sets of parents. Both of them had non-biological partners, paramours, if you will. The child was nonverbal. There had been an indication at one point about scratches and possibly an incident. So I wonder why, this case was, why there wasn't, I think I describe it as a ball of fire flying out of a computer with all of these indications that when the SACWIS and CWIS systems, do they add up all of these factors to set off an alarm bell, if you will, about the fact. First of all, the case closed in record time. I think that there's a lot of people who it seems like it closed in 2 months. The other factor that would have been something that may have set off alarm bells is that there was a second removal of the child. And for some reason, the reset button on aftercare was not reset with all of these other factors. And I would imagine, and I believe that I have heard that non-biological parents in a home, that there are a greater sense of incidence for what happened to Denaje. She was with her mother and her mother's boyfriend. And the child, the police report indicated that the child, the older brother who was the biological child of the boyfriend, was in a warm room with both of these people, and that Denaje was in another room. Is there a history of, or a pattern where we have that kind of an incident, situation? You have two sets of parents, and in each of those homes, there's one non-biological parent. That is a double risk factor. So what is missing from this computer system that doesn't raise a flag on that call that came in on November 6th, where it was just categorized as a non-medical compliance after the case was closed, when you have this long history of problems? I think that the failure may be in what we try and use as factors to build a case that would make us worry again after a case is closed. And moving forward with a commitment to better technology, is the new system that we are hoping to have going to include those factors so that we could have gotten in front of this before the tragedy occurred? Lots of questions. You know, I also have concerns about do you know how many case managers were looking at this case and working with this case at Webster Cantrell during this process?
Yes, there were 3 caseworkers during the time that she entered care to the time she left care.
And do you have concerns about why the aftercare wasn't continued after the removal on June 27th, 2018?
In my mind, in the reading of our contract with private agencies, aftercare would have been for 6 months, starting on August, going through February. So that's some work we need to do around our contracts to clarify that aftercare is for the aftercare is to be provided for 6 months based on the return of each individual child, not for a family composition, because the family could have 4 different children in care being returned at 4 different times. And if you start the aftercare with the return of the first child, then you would miss out on 6 months of aftercare for that last child returned to the family. So we have to be very explicit in the contract to say for the return home of each child.
With each parent, because what happened here is there was an incident with the mother and her paramour and also the father and his partner. So, I mean, I think that this is procedure, rule, or what have you, but this is where I see there may have been a gap. And there, you know, could you answer the question maybe? I don't know if you're prepared for that, but the question about the computer system and the technology that you're bringing in and how it may be more user-friendly so that, you know, if we're going to have a 3 caseworker turnover, how are we going to, you know, how are we going to have judgment on a case like this that's been closed?
So our current system is we use SACWIS and CISIS to get the prior history information about a family, 2 totally different systems that don't communicate with each other. Where we hope to go is CWIS, which we would have to put out, which would have, we hope will have all of the information in one place and would be able to do some predictive analytics for us. But we have to, because of procurement laws, we have to do an RFP, a request for proposal, and then you have to evaluate those proposals, and then the one who scores the highest will win the bid. But we're asking for it. We will put it in the RFP, but we have to go through the procurement laws to actually award the contract to build our new system.
But you can articulate that you want an integrated system. I mean, I think the fact that there were 3 caseworkers, you have a handwritten report. Is it a handwritten report or is it computerized?
No, it's computerized. SACWIS is computerized.
And the hotline has access to the caseworkers and this timeline and all of the incidents?
The hotline has access to information that comes through the hotline. If we opened a case, if we took an investigation, if we opened an intact case, or whether or not we did a placement case with the family. They have the history of our involvement with the family. They don't have the case-specific notes and reports that go along with the family. Some of the case notes in supporting documentation could be 500 to 600 pages long. So when someone is calling the hotline to say a child is at risk or in danger, we can't wait for that call taker to read the 600-page case file before making a determination if what's being told to them put this child at risk.
I think what I'm specifically asking for is consideration of a few check boxes. You've got a nonverbal child, 2 paramours in each parental setting, a second removal, some physical indications, weight loss, or marks on the abdomen, things that if you check the box, if you check like 3 or 4 boxes, that might trigger something more than a McNutt or whatever the medical noncompliance, even whether the case is open or closed.
Right. Hopefully maybe that's something that we can work with this committee on, looking at what happens at the hotline.
So, Director, there's going to be a clinical review, and when are you hoping to get that review done by?
The clinical review should be done within 30 days from now.
We cannot see that, correct?
No, you cannot.
Okay.
It contains confidential mental health, will contain mental health information regarding the parents.
But we can see your recommendations after you get it, correct?
Yes, we can share the recommendations from the clinical review.
The other question I have on the review and the investigation for the OIG is when you do your recommendations, they're simply that, right? There's no force of anything that says that the department has to try and comply or change their procedures. It's just they can take it or leave it, correct?
Right.
Okay. So that, of course, is maybe these problems repeat themselves, maybe? I mean, from your estimation?
Yes, I mean, I think some of the recommendations we've made, many of the same ones over the years. Again, it's the director of the department's the policy maker, so they are in charge of setting that policy and implementing those recommendations.
Well, you know, you do have the Adoption and Child Welfare Committee now, which is why we want to see them, because we may be a force to reckon with on those recommendations. The other question is...
So our recommendations, I just want to clarify, Representative, are made directly to the director. We meet with the director, and our reports are confidential as well until what we do in our annual report is we change the identifiers and we, remove that confidential information so you can see what the work.
Well, we have
a
a very large document with recommendations that we will be combing through so that we can see what we can move forward on. The other question, Meryl, is when is your investigation going to be done? Is it feasible for us to ask you to complete it in 30 days? And if you can't do it in 30 days, can you tell us what the obstacles are?
So I hate to commit to a 30-day time frame only because that is, as I mentioned earlier, we have to collect a lot of records that need to be reviewed. So I currently have 3 of my investigators working on this case together as a team, so it's not just assigned to one person. And we have already obtained some of the records that we need, but we do need to get police reports and autopsy reports. And I did talk to them to see how much we have currently and where we're going. We have still to conduct interviews, figure out who we need to interview. So we often can issue an interim report based on some information. But what's really important about the interviews is we learn a lot more information that you get in a record review when you have the opportunity to talk to people.
Right.
So my hope is that, we would have this done before the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30th, but maybe an interim report sooner than that.
Thank you both for your answers, and to the committee for allowing me to jump in there on some of the follow-up questions. Representative Kifowit has a question.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm excited to be on this committee, not excited about this subject matter, though. I have a few questions. We talk about Webster Cantrell Hall as being a private company. How many private companies, privatization of this function, does DCFS work with? What is the extent of the privatization of DCFS with these children?
1 second. Well, I can give you the percentage without giving you the exact count, but 80% of our placement cases when children are in placement are with the private sector.
So 80% of cases are under private companies, not that are contracted by the state.
Private agencies contracted that we enter into a contract with to provide that service.
Are they for-profit or not-for-profits?
Not for profit.
All of them?
1 second, please. There's one for-profit, which is Camelot. The others are non-for-profit, and 85% of our children who are in placement are with private agencies.
And I'm assuming you can provide the committee with a list of those private agencies that are non-for-profit?
Yes.
Correct. You stated that Webster Cantrell Hall had 3 caseworkers in this timeline, which is about a year. Who in the department, who from the state is overseeing or managing this turnover of caseworkers to ensure that there is ample communication, 1, between the 3 caseworkers, information gets conveyed, and 2, how is information then conveyed to the state? So who's overseeing? Is there a supervisor? Is there somebody from the state overseeing these individuals? What's your hierarchy or your structure? How is the state, since we're privatized 85% of our cases, how is the state ensuring oversight on such a turnover, such as 3 caseworkers in less than a year?
So private agencies have monitors assigned. Monitors are assigned to a group of private agencies that they are to monitor. The monitors from DCFS are to provide technical assistance to the agencies and then look for concerns. In some counties, in some regions, we receive court reports that alert us to issues that may be happening with a specific private agency, and then that monitor will go in and try to assist with whatever the issue was identified by the court report or some other way the information may come to DCFS. But the individual day-to-day supervision of the work is done by the supervisor and the program manager of that private agency.
So the case management is done by the private agency, and the private agency in and of themselves are supervising themselves, and the only avenue the state has is through these monitors that are just assigned to the agencies for technical support as a broad overview. So am I hearing you correctly? That's what the monitors are per agency. I wrote that down. And then you just said that the supervisors are supervisors within the private companies that are supervising their own workers.
Right, as well as there's a program manager at that private agency, and then there are performance measures that come back to DCFS, that DCFS looks at that shows how well or if an agency may need some assistance, and then that monitor will have a conversation, a meeting with the agency to discuss, do a corrective action plan around what was indicated in that those performance ratings.
And so the performance measures, I'm assuming, are evaluated whether or not to continue a contract into the next. So that you're saying the private organization has to or should strive to having good performance measures from their supervisors and program managers to continue a contract, I would assume. That's one of the measurements of contracts, whether they're being renewed or not?
It's a whole, we look at a lot of things on whether or not
Well, I just said one of the factors.
Yes,
right, okay.
that's one factor.
One of the questions I have, and you mentioned this in your testimony, is you said that when a call comes in, the helpline, you start an investigation. Was an investigation opened with regards to the hotline call on 6/27 that resulted in the removal from her father's home? Was there an active investigation open with regards to that call?
Yes.
And then we have the timeline. So we have an open investigation with regards to the mother, and now you just said an open investigation with regard to the father. Is there, or would there have been any thought to say, why don't we look at another family member like a grandparent or an aunt, rather than referring the child back to a home that the child was just removed from a couple months ago, into a home that now that child is removed from again? So what is the thought process, and just forgive me because I'm new to this, of not investigating competent family members that could have taken in a placement rather than returning the child back to a home that she was just removed from a few months earlier?
In reading the case file and conversations with the caseworker from Webster Cantrell, it was reported that the mother had completed all services and was ready for the return of her daughter.
But your timeline does not reflect that. Your timeline said that she was removed from her father's home following a hotline call alleging abuse. So it's kind of, if you go through all these steps, I mean, one can, by order of the court, she was returned home to her mother. So she goes through all these programs. Then what is, I guess my question is, this evaluation process, she was removed, she was bounced back and forth. Why don't we find a stable family member for this child? So the father was evaluated, she could go to the father's house, then all of a sudden something was wrong with the father's house, and then now she's back to the mother's house. It just seems very disjoint in and of the fact for the stability of the child. I understand there's a view to get the child back to the parents, but I think the bigger focus here needs to be the stability and the wellness of the child than bouncing back and forth with regards to whether it was evaluated or not, or whether the father, the mother, and back and forth, and now ultimately she passed. I mean, similarly, in my area, Samal Crosby was investigated by DCFS in April, and then she was found smothered under a couch of the same day of the visit. So I question these visits by these private entities, of which the DCFS has hardly any control over the functionality, because you have the caseworkers being overseen by their supervisors, project managers of these private entities, and DCFS seems not to be engaged with these kids. My follow-up questions, and I shall be brief, I appreciate it. With the Inspector General report, I noticed that we have 26 undetermined child deaths. Can you expound upon how we have these undetermined, undetermined asphyxia, and then under undetermined, we have 14 of those 26 undetermined again. Can you please expound upon just labeling these child deaths as undetermined and then undetermined again for 14 of those?
Sure. So the coroners only have 5 manners of death that they can choose from. So when you're looking at undetermined, that's one of the 5. It's homicide, suicide, natural, accidental, and then undetermined. So in our report, those are the, that's what we've gathered from the coroner's findings. They've ruled those deaths undetermined. So they have not been able to make a determination that it was any of those other 4 causes.
So it's just based on the coroner's results?
Yes.
And then in your review, when we have accidental deaths, do you look at averages and trend? Because we have accidental deaths of suffocation, asphyxia, sleep-related. Do we look at trends in terms of, is this a standard number of children that could potentially pass, or is this a high number? And with regards to your findings?
Yeah, so one of the things that our office can do is, at the request of the director, or if we notice a particularly high level of complaints or issues around a specific segment of the child welfare system, then we will do a systemic review. So there have been various systemic reviews done in the past around homicides that were occurring of youth in care, around unsafe sleep-related deaths. We're looking at the beyond medical necessity issues. We've done systemic reviews around intact family services. So that is something, we do try to look at those trends, yes.
And then just my one very, very quick question. The determination that the scratches were verified as scarring from a previous incident, was this verified by a medical doctor, by the child's medical doctor or medical records, or was this established by the case manager?
It was, a hotline call was accepted the investigator who went out along with the caseworker instructed the mother and caseworker to take the child to a doctor, a physician, and it's recorded in the case file and reported by the caseworker that the doctor said that these were bruises resulting back from a previous incident.
So the caseworker has the authority to take a child to a doctor?
With the mother, yes.
With the mother present?
Yeah. If the child is in care, the caseworker has the authority to take the child to the doctor. If the child is in the custody of the parent, then the parent takes the child to the doctor, and the caseworker can go with or follow up with a phone call or a visit to the doctor's office to get the information.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to, the next person with a question is Representative Edley Allen. Representative Ramirez.
Director and Inspector General, I really appreciate you being here today. I certainly believe that this is certainly far more than one department, and we have to get to the systemic roots where we don't prioritize our children and we don't keep our children safe. So I appreciate you being here, and certainly, as our chair has indicated, this committee will take this very seriously and as a priority. I ran a social service agency, worked there for 13 years, and 9 years of that I was the executive director running a family shelter. And so I've had the opportunity sometimes, and sometimes the difficulty of working with DCFS. And one of the questions that I have now is more from a service provision. When you contract these agencies, which 80% of the work is done through these agencies, what is a case management ratio, child to case management? What's the ratio?
Currently, it is approximately 6 to 1 or 7 to 1. In most agencies, it's 7 to 1. And we're trying to get them down to 5 to 1 one supervisor to 5 staff.
So 1 supervisor to 5 staff, and as it pertains to case managers to children, what is that ratio? How many children are under the care or the caseload of each case manager?
1 second. 15 to 1 for traditional.
15 to 1 for traditional. And then for non-traditional?
10 to 1.
And so every single agency that you contract, you require within the RFP and the contract that they have a 15 to 1 or 10 to 1. Is that correct?
That's in the program plan, yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned that you have monitors, and monitors are providing TA and capacity, but also doing some of the checking in with the organizations to ensure that they're in fact enforcing the protocol and the agreement between DCFS and the agency. What is the ratio between monitor to agency? So how many agencies per monitor?
I don't have that information, but I can get it for you.
Okay. I appreciate that. Oftentimes what I have seen and having worked with other city agencies is that there is no real relationship, and the relationship is very limited, either because we have limited staffing supervision on the department side or within the organization. And so oftentimes a lot of the protocols we talk about are not in fact enforced. And I'm concerned that this has been the case in the past, and I'm sure that you're going to do whatever it takes to ensure this doesn't happen again. The final thing I want to say, again, having the case management heart that I have, and looking at the timeline, I think Representative Feigenholtz and a couple of other of my colleagues mentioned this, but if it's not law, I certainly will do whatever I have to do to legislate and introduce this as a bill. But it appears to me that when the child was returned to the mother on August 8th, the 6-month aftercare requirement should have restarted at that moment. And it makes me wonder if that aftercare support had been in fact implemented or had restarted at that moment if Tanaja Barnes would have still been alive today, because that would have meant that by February, that it would have gone from August 8th to February 8th, and they found her body, or they found her on February 11th, weighing 6 pounds less than she weighed when she was returned home. And so I really can't stop thinking about what would have happened if, in fact, this child would have had the aftercare that was necessary, and we did not provide for her. And the state, and we, as the state, have a lot of responsibility to her death, and I take that very personal. And I certainly will do whatever it takes within this committee, and I think with my colleagues, to ensure that what happened to her doesn't happen to any more of our children, particularly her Black and brown children who continue to die due to so many systemic issues in our state and country. So I just wanted to make that as a statement, and I certainly asked the question, but I think I've answered it myself.
Well, thank you for your support.
We have one follow-up question from Representative Scheer, and is there anybody, Representative Summer, after, no, you're good? Okay. Representative Scheer.
Thank you. I just can't wrap my mind around this. On the timeline, it says that on December 23rd, at the very beginning of 2017, that a hotline call came in. And then on the 27th, just a couple days later, a case was opened. And then on the 28th, Tanaja and her brother were both put into foster care. So how old was her brother when that happened? Because on the previous page, it says that her brother was 1 year old, like now. So to me, that sounds like he would have just been born, or?
I don't have his date of birth in the documents in front of me, but I can, 1 second.
Okay, thank you. While we wait, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I'm looking out and I'm just seeing so many faces of so much concern, and it's amazing how much compassion is in this one room, and we appreciate it.
The date of birth is May 1st, 2017. So in December, he would have been 7 months old.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no other questions from committee members, I want to assure both the department, the governor's office, and members of the committee that we will continue to talk about this, whether it be in a work group or around a table, to try and get to the bottom of this so that the recommendations that come from the OIG, some of what the gaps that we've been discussing here, and other details are followed up on to improve the delivery system from this department. I want to thank everyone for their time. The reason there has never been an Adoption and Child Welfare Committee in the Illinois General Assembly before is because this is tough. This is tough. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Illinois Channel. You may also wish to follow us online, where you are free to make comments or program suggestions. Get our breaking news updates on Twitter, where you can find us at Illinois Channel. You can find our past programming on YouTube at youtube.com/Illinois Channel TV. Or you can go to the Illinois Channel website at illinoischannel.org. There you can find not only our current video stories and programs, but also our library of past programs, as well as articles that provide additional information about Illinois issues and individuals. The Illinois Channel, keeping you connected to your state, your issues, your home.